characterized by an early loss of reduced glutathione. And in the mitochondria, you need that glutathione for specific enzymes. And these enzymes, they generate or they donate the sulfur for these iron-sulfur clusters in the mitochondria. And when you have less of that enzyme or less of the glutathione, you have less of these very important enzymes. In a scheme, it looks like this: less glutathione, less glutaredoxine, less activity of mitochondrial complex 1 and other of these enzymes, with the result that free iron increases, which is further problematic for your brain cells. You see already a 40 to 90% depletion in glutathione in Parkinson's disease patients. And this is very important. The severity of the symptoms correlates with the depletion of glutathione. It is as simple as that. Of course, you measure elevated levels of any peroxide or other substances. I'm sure that the other device will also measure the 8, what is it called? Hydroxyl radical. You see increased SOD activity, but not an increase in the glutathione peroxidase. So the body tries to neutralize the superoxide anion, but it cannot neutralize the hydrogen peroxide. And with that, we have a major problem. Here you see that scheme again. Catalase could neutralize hydrogen peroxide, but our brain almost has no catalase activity. So you are completely dependent on glutathione. Because we have no catalase, we need the reduced glutathione to neutralize the hydrogen peroxide. And because the concentration of the oxidized glutathione increases, the balance is disturbed and the cell thinks, I pump out that oxidized glutathione to restore the ratio of these two types of glutathione, with the result that the total amount of glutathione will ever be lower and lower in the cell. And the substantia nigra, this is now just a small part regarding Parkinson's, it is especially vulnerable because it has, of course, a high dopamine content. And dopamine can auto-oxidize very easily. It just needs a reaction with oxygen and you get a active form of dopamine which is even more detrimental. As we saw, you have a free high iron content, and that is higher as the disease progresses. Parkinson's patients have higher activities of MAO-A and MAO-B, the monoamine oxidase enzymes. So that is just a reaction of the body to counteract the loss of dopamine. And of course, they have a very low content of glutathione. And the next table is very interesting because here you see healthy people with a normal glutathione content. This is end-stage Parkinson's disease, very low glutathione content. And what is interesting, this group, the C plus PD, these are caretakers of patients with Parkinson's disease. So already the caretakers are starting to experience lower levels of reduced glutathione. Why? Because taking care of a chronically ill patient who is debilitated causes stress, and stress causes causes higher radicals and lower glutathione. Of course, it's not so severe here yet, but compared to, and when you have initial Parkinson's disease, you just have the first symptoms. He looks a little strange and walks a little strange. Then you already have lost about 40-50% of your glutathione. So in this regard, prevention is the main key as well. Here another study to show what can be caused or what can cause brain inflammation. How are microglia cells in the brain activated? Well, that's a number of mechanisms. I'm not going to read them all out loud, but some are very obvious. Here you see the INOS, that's the inducible nitric oxide synthase, and it is the inducible enzyme which is very bad. You also have an endothelial NOS, and you also have a neuronal NOS. Those are healthy. But when you have the INOS, that produces the bad nitric oxide, which eventually leads to peroxynitrate. But in an inflamed brain, you see also a release of tumor necrosis factor alpha, and you also see less substances which regenerate the brain. IGF-1, which I told you also about the sleeping pattern, and here the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, it's also decreased when you have chronic inflammation in your brain. That also accounts for autism, which I call neurodegeneration in a developing brain. One of the good substances which is used very much in Japan, because in general you consume much more fish than the average European. And when you use fish, you also use the DHA, the docosahexaenoic acid. And this study already proves that this substance alone already decreases cell death caused by mercury. So this specific form of fish oil protects your brain from the bad effects of mercury to some extent. And then you only have one intervention. I will show you many more during the coming hours. So now we come to diagnostics. What do we do in our clinic? We also like to do as much as tests possible, which is logical for the patient and logical for our treatment evaluation and plan, with the least cost of for the patient, of course. So before we commence any treatment, we take a very careful history taking. We have 20 pages of paper, A4 papers to fill out. And of course, it is also important to ask for the teeth. And for those who do questionnaires, don't ask people to fill out if they have amalgam fillings or crowns, but just let them open their mouth. You can see them. And you can also see when they have been restored by composites or something like that. And otherwise, ask the dentist of the patient. So look in the patient's mouth. As said, this is bad, this is worse, this is worst. If you have a dead teeth in your mouth, try to find a dentist who is willing to remove that tooth, because it causes slow death. If your finger is dying, then the surgeon will tell you, well, we need to cut it off now, otherwise in a few days you will be very sick. With a tooth, it just takes a little longer, because the amount of toxins produced are much less, but accumulative over time, they just kill you. Check inflammation, check the HS-CRP, or check interleukin-6. Why interleukin-6? A short sidestep. That is the trigger for the body to produce CRP. Interleukin-6 comes from activated macrophages, T cells, or fat cells. It produces CRP, and CRP is the only common predictor of early morbidity and early mortality. Therefore, that HS-CRP is so important, the lower the better. What does CRP do? Well, it binds to a certain type of choline called lysophosphatidylcholine of dead or dying cells, and also some pathogens. and it activates the complement system. Do you remember the complement system, that whole cascade of proteins to make a hole in some bacteria? And that lysophosphatidylcholine is formed from cell membrane substance, phosphatidylcholine. And an important enzyme there is phospholipase A2, and it is this enzyme, that's A2, which releases arachidonic acid. That's meat. Our cells, we have an animal body. Our cells also produce a lot of arachidonic acid. When that is released, you can produce the bad prostaglandins. And what they do in the hospital, when they have certain types of inflammation and nothing works, well, then they give corticosteroids. We call it a horse medication in the Netherlands because it blocks almost everything. And of course, it also blocks this enzyme. But it does not cure the patient's condition. So after that, check then mineral trace element status with spectrophotometry. And combine it, at least that is what we do in our clinic, we combine it with a one-time provocation test. It's an intravenous test. It is also doable to make an oral test with some other chelating agents, but I will show you what we use. And with these tests, we already see a lot of problems for the patient. Why these two tests? Well, blood is only applicable in an acute situation. This morning there was a question of one of the attendees, how to detect what is a normal zinc level, what is a normal, whatever level it is, of which element. Well, that is not to be answered because regions can be different, females can be different, Europe and Asia can be different, but also the compartment you are looking at. Blood is totally different than hair. Hair is totally different than urine. Urine is totally different than the spectrophotometer because you are measuring totally different things. So the only thing you can do is to ask the local distributor when they have performed enough analysis in Japan to make a 95% curve of the trace elements. Heavy metals don't belong in the body, so you can just make some adjustments there. But the trace elements, just measure thousands of people and make a Gaussian curve. It's easy to do because it will be a Gaussian curve, but maybe for the Asian people that curve is slightly to the right or to the left compared to other countries. But as I said, blood is only applicable in acute situations, but there have been done studies, a very recent one in Chinese, that it has relationships, cadmium. Blood cadmium had a relationship with the fasting glucose, plasma glucose. And very surprisingly, blood cadmium had a negative correlation with obesity. For me, that's very logical. Why it has a negative correlation? It just means that obese people have less blood cadmium, even if they would have the same amount of smoke or a living environment. Very simple, because that blood cadmium in their body is located in the fatty tissue. Therefore, they have more storage capacity for toxins. That is what fat people do. But after the age of 56, then one of the meridians falls out. It's one of the newer meridians. It's not the standard of the 14 Chinese meridians, but there is one called fatty degeneration. It starts with your toe and goes upward through your body. It is associated with the fatty tissue that dies after the age of 56. So when you are obese, or you have patients who are obese and are approaching the age of 56, you can expect an implosion of chronic disease, whether it's cardiovascular or cancer or any other. Because after that time, the toxins from the fatty tissue are being exposed. They will come out. Low level lead and blood pressure. Mainstream medicine is now recognizing that lead might be a contributing factor to hypertension. Then you can do full blood analysis. That's a German test where they take the blood and they don't only take the plasma, but they make the red blood cells destroyed, and then they compare the total value with that of plasma. And then they say, this is an intracellular test. Well, that's only true for blood. It's an intracellular test for blood. But we have seen many examples. Many people have in this test a very low zinc, especially obese people. And then they are given zinc, or cancerous patients who have very low copper in this test. But when we measure in the palm of the hand, they have excessive amounts. So by giving them zinc or copper in that instance, you are making the condition worse, although this test tells you you should give it. It's the same problem as with chronic inflammation and iron. Every doctor knows that in chronic inflammation, serum iron is lowered, but the ferritin increases. What does that mean? It just means that the iron is displaced from the extracellular to the intracellular environment. So when you have an anemia of chronic inflammation in a cancer patient, would you then give iron in high dosages just to correct the anemia? Yes, if you want to kill the patient prematurely, you should do that. But if you want to help him, you should make sure that the intracellular iron is displaced back into the extracellular space, so the bone can resorb and can produce red blood cells. The same accounts for zinc or copper or any other trace element. You cannot just compare these tests and say, oh, this is a wrong method or this is a good method. No, you need to consider in which environment am I measuring now. Is it extra or is it intracellularly? Hair mineral analysis, a very good test for a very long time because it was the best we had. I will come to this profile a little later. It's just to show here that generally you have to consider that 90% of the human hair is in the growth phase, and in that time, only when they grow, they can incorporate any element. And they can only incorporate what's in blood. So when the blood supply is high, then they will absorb a lot. The blood supply is low, they absorb a low. But hair mineral analysis also has its limitations. If we just know that, it's okay, because in autistic children who are heavily exposed to aluminum and mercury, you in general find very low levels of mercury and aluminum, which is also very logical because these metals are situated inside their brain cells. Therefore, they cannot appear in their hair. So it's kind of limitation as well. But it is a good test. If you have a good lab, it's a good test to do. Then we do a provocation test. Very useful because it's not only a test, but it's also a treatment right away. Because with these chelating agents, you lose a lot of metals once they are located in your extracellular environment, which is your blood and the matrix outside the cells, 15 liters in total. That can be cleansed of metals when you do a provocation test. Any provocation test with common chelating agents will not clean your cells. It's impossible. These chelating agents do not penetrate cell membranes. So that's what they determine. Here you have a provocation test like we do. We inject within half an hour 2 chelating agents. One is called DTPA and the other one is called DMPS. Together they cover the whole spectrum of toxic metals. Especially DMPS is a very potent general chelating agent. DTPA cannot bind mercury, cannot bind arsenic, cannot bind silver inside the body. There's a difference between inside and outside the body. In test tubes, yes, but inside the body, not. Has to do with all kinds of ligands like sulfur. But here you see a patient with an extremely high mercury, 134 micrograms per gram of creatinine. It's very much. And you are in the 90% percentile and higher. So this patient has a lot of heavy metals in the extracellular environment. Very good detectable by a provocation test. You want to know more regarding the provocation test, write an email to this doctor. As I said, 88 years of age, still updating the textbook every year or half year. It's already now the 14th edition, and it's the standard teaching book regarding all toxic metals, but also all trace elements. All metals, trace elements, and treatment regimes, all orthomolecular medicines you need for detox, etc., are being spoken of in this textbook. So, then we come to the spectrophotometry. That's a live measurement. That's one thing to recognize. Living tissue is different than when you take it out and it's dead. And the key difference between all other tests and this one is the cell membrane. Because how it works, if nobody can explain you how, but when a beam of light, which is quantized, every beam of light which comes out of that device is a certain amount of light. And we know already from hundreds of years ago that Einstein said it, light is also a photon, and a photon you can count. So many photons are coming out with a certain amount of frequencies, so momentum. And when the momentum changes, then you can gather from that, you can calculate that when so much red has been absorbed and so much green has been absorbed, there has been something responsible for that. And that are metals, because metals have a color. Magnesium green, cobalt blue, or copper red, or whatever. So they have a color. And that's, of course, their secret, how the algorithm is calculated. But anyway, when that beam of light hits your skin and starts measuring, it has to penetrate at least one cell membrane. Otherwise, it cannot measure at all. So the crux here, the major difference between these and other tests is the cell membrane. So for those who have a device, this is a little bit less important now, but for those who don't have one, how's the technology? It measures optical density. The same device is used in car industry. It's exactly the same device, because when they want to make a color on the car, they put on the spectrophotometer. It determines the exact frequency of the color, and then the machine who makes the color can exactly produce that color. It's exactly the same machine. Only the computer behind it, of course, is different. There is a law, Lambert's law, which states more light is absorbed when the density of a substance is increased, which is very logic. And therefore you can make a quantitative analysis according to this law. The amount absorbed has then a log scale, etc. I'm not a physicist, but I believe what they say there. And what you get is a unit which is not which is not expressed in a unit, because what they do, you have that amount of light which corresponds to an amount of magnesium or zinc. And that's an amount, that's milligram, or whatever amount it is, and you divide that by total body weight. And when you divide milligram by kilogram, you get a unitless expression. And that's understandable, I think. And unitless, you can also then say ppm. Then you call parts per million or parts per trillion, however you want to quantify it. Therefore, you see no expression on this sheet, because it's a unitless measurement, but it is quantifiable. How do you do it? Well, it's in 4 steps. You measure 4 places of the palm of the hand, because every race has the same color, and you don't have to put off your clothes, so it's very easy. Then the machine starts calculating. That's the spectrophotometrical analysis. The secret of the computer, the algorithmic calculations, how can we convert these amounts of frequencies into a real unit of milligrams? and then you get the results within 10 seconds. And the advantages are, it is non-invasive, it is direct. You don't wait weeks. The patient, like in hair mineral analysis, they had to wait 3-4 weeks, and then to come back to discuss the results, and that meant already a second consultation. Now we do it during the first consultation, so the patient benefits twice. It's less money for him, or maybe 3 advantages: less money, less waiting time, and no second consultation. You can make a direct treatment plan. It reflects much better the patient's condition on a tisular level, but you have to remember, it is still only skin you measure. You don't see directly how many metals are located inside your brain. You measure the skin of the palm of the hand. But by making a lot of analysis and comparing results, we can now deduct. We are able now to see when a specific profile with a specific patient, how you can interpret the results more effectively. This is what I do in general to say. Here you have that cell membrane. This is the extracellular environment, and that the intracellular divided in liquid, the matrix, which is liquid and intracellular, and then pure intracellular itself. So you can say all organs try to excrete. When you have a little nasal problem or lung problem, you will produce mucus, which is just an excretory product. So when that system is overloaded, then the body needs to do another mechanism because it cannot hyper-excrete anymore. Then it will do an inflammation of the membranes. Then you have a sinusitis or a bronchitis. And in most cases, those are then suppressed by antibiotics, which does not heal the body. It just bypasses the problem for a certain amount of time. So when you do many antibiotics or corticosteroids, you just suppress the symptom, and then the metals or other toxins are just deposited inside the matrix, where we cannot see them with any regular diagnostic tool because they are deposited far away from blood, but they are there. And when that system continues, that mechanism continues long enough, then the toxins are moved inside the cell. You get impregnation. So as I always tell to the patient, the following example: you live in an area where you have several houses with many streets in between. The streets are your lymph and your blood vessels. It is the extracellular. Inside the houses, the people live. That's intracellularly. And when you look at an environment, you cannot tell from the waste products outside on the streets how it looks inside, because it could look very dirty outside, but inside the houses could be very clean. And the reverse. Houses can be very, very messy, but the streets are very, very neat. And you think, oh, this is a nice, neat neighborhood. But inside the houses, many, many toxins are deposited. You cannot see that, only now. And when the impregnation continues, because first a toxin comes inside the cytoplasma, it's bad, but not as bad as when the toxin is now getting into the organelles, the organs of the cell, like the mitochondria, like the endoplasmatic reticulum. Then even organ function inside the cell is inhibited. And last but not least, toxins can get into the nucleus, and then you can have a lot of diseases associated with that. So very quickly, you have a fever, you get antibiotics and a painkiller, you develop a rash, an dermatitis. It goes away silently. Then the people develop a tonsillitis, an inflamed tissue here. They get another set of antibiotics. They develop diarrhea. It gets silent again. Another tonsillitis that happened in my life, and then again diarrhea, colitis is developed. So some people then, you know that, people who are a lot of tonsillitis or a lot of dermatitis eventually develop asthma. That is then inhibited by corticosteroids. And when that is even prolonged after 10, 20 years, they might develop Crohn's disease. They can get arrhythmia through that, or they develop colon cancer. This is also a scheme of Ronald Reagan's, of the former president of the United States. And when you treat colon cancer, the colon cancer is gone, but almost invariably they all develop Alzheimer's disease.